Whenever we hear of a scandal in Hollywood, have you noticed that we don't really think about it much anymore? We're no longer shocked to hear about the details of someone who was once a child star when they get into trouble or when they ruin their career. And the same attitude has crept into sports. We were shocked back in the days of Pete Rose and his scandal. Then we began to view the failures of superstar athletes as a source of humor and jokes, like the Tiger Woods fiasco he found himself in a few years ago. Whenever someone makes poor decisions that ruins what was once a stellar career in life, it's always tragic. But it's always the worst case scenarios in the case of a Christian, especially those who are in the spotlight. I was a young kid in the 1980s, but I remember the publicity of the Jim Bakker and the Jimmy Swaggart failures that dominated the news at the time. Now, I was an unsaved little kid at the time, so I can't tell you anything about the doctrine of those men, but the news told me all that I needed to know about their morality. But isn't it odd how the news will put the brightest spotlight on any flaw or any failure of a person who names the name of Christ, but they will turn their attention away and turn a blind eye to certain celebrities and certain politicians that they don't want to get in trouble. Well, newsflash, all Christians are sinners. Even your pastor, anybody on the radio and the TV, the internet. When you name the name of Christ, you should always be cautious to bring glory to the name instead of shame. In the past few years, there have been several pastors and teachers that were once respected and even revered who have fallen from grace, as some people call it. I say if they confess and they repent, technically they fall into grace, as do you and I. Now, I was shocked when the news came out about the death of Ravi Zacharias. I was even more shocked when not long after his death, the truth came out about all of the wicked things that he had gotten caught up in. That man once had one of the most brilliant minds and such a way of explaining theological things. He could silence most critics and he could answer the toughest questions in a way that would be plain and clear. Not too long ago, a big fuss was made over Pastor Tony Evans, who stepped down after he confessed to a moral failure. Now, I'm going to be honest with you here. I'm glad he confessed, and I'm glad that he is doing the right thing. But I am not throwing away any of his books, nor am I going to stop listening to any of his sermons. Is he a sinner? Yes, just like you are, just like I am. No one is perfect, but when he preached and when he wrote those books, he was influenced and led by the Holy Spirit. So therefore, those teachings are still beneficial. But a great effort should be made by Christians to finish well. In the 1980s, there was a preacher named Vance Havner who delivered a sermon that was called Home Before Dark. And in that sermon, he made a startling statement. He said, "I've stood at the fresh grave of many a preacher who should have died 10 years earlier." Unlike the Apostle Paul, not everyone finishes the race well. They did not fight the good fight until the end. They did not keep their eye on the prize before them, and sadly, such is the case with Abraham's son, Isaac. Isaac started out so well, and then like many of the others in the Bible, his flame had fizzled in the latter years of his life. Now, there's a ton of application for our lives that's in this chapter, and it covers the incredibly dysfunctional family, but one of the main things that we need to observe and learn from this is the decline of faith of the promised son Isaac. Instead, we should give our best efforts to finish well. So in Genesis chapter 27, let us begin with verses 1 through 4. Now it came about when Isaac was old and his eyes were too dim to see, that he called his older son Esau and said to him, "My son." And he said to him, "Here I am." Isaac said, "Behold now, I am old and I do not know the day of my death. Now then, please take your gear, your quiver, and your bow, and go out to the field and hunt game for me, and prepare a savory dish for me such as I love, and bring it to me that I may eat, so that my soul may bless you before I die." Before we go any further, do you see the problem here? Is it clear what Isaac just did? He purposed in his heart to bless and bestow family authority over the wrong son. To begin with, God had told Rebekah a long time ago, who obviously told her husband back when these sons were born, that the older was going to serve the younger. Now Esau had also married since then two wicked foreign women, therefore disqualified himself from leading the family. I guess Isaac forgot the years of all the anguish and everything that were caused by the wives of Esau. Also, I'm sure the account of Esau despising and selling his birthright was probably not a secret within the family. There is no reason other than selfishness to give this blessing to Esau. I'm actually surprised that Jacob was not Isaac's favorite. Isaac was a quiet man who would rather walk away from conflict rather than stand up and resist anyone that would cause him trouble. But the scripture made it clear in these verses that Esau had become his favorite. We begin with Isaac saying that he is about to die in verse 2. The problem is Isaac was 137 years old at this time, and we know that he did not die until he was 180. He still has another 43 years left. Isaac probably just had a common cold, and he's sitting like most of us men, sitting there sniffling, confident that this is the end. But in reality, I can understand Isaac's thinking. He certainly is old, and then there is the fact that his eyesight has already deteriorated, but maybe he's also considering the number of his age, which was 137. His half-brother Ishmael died at the age of 137. So I can see Isaac beginning to think that maybe he doesn't have much time left. Now remember this, when Abraham was approaching death's door, he put his house in order. He made it a priority to make sure that the son of promise would not marry a Canaanite woman. Abraham sent a servant to take a trip that was 3 weeks one way, between 500 to 900 miles one way, depending on the route he took, just to find a bride for Isaac that would be suitable. Had Isaac forgotten how important that was to his father? Why had he not done the same for Esau before he wed these troublemakers? Why was he not doing this for Jacob, the son that God promised to bless and to be with? Abraham had also made sure to give gifts to all of his sons. He gave things to Ishmael, to the 6 sons that he had with Keturah after Sarah died. But after that, he sent them all packing. He sent them to the east so that Isaac would receive the promised land and the promises and the blessings that God had given to him. When David knew he was about to die, he wrote down the plans to build the temple. He secured materials so that his son Solomon could build it. Everything would be ready that he would need to finish it. When the Apostle Paul knew that his time was almost up, he spent his last moments writing letters to Timothy, telling him to carry on the torch and to keep the faith. When Jesus was on the cross, he entrusted the care of his mother to John, who was standing there. In the midst of all of that suffering, he was caring for others. Yet all that concerned Isaac, when he's putting his house in order and preparing to die, getting something good to eat. If Abraham could have seen the son of promise now, I can almost bet you he would have worked him over with his sandal. So many people start out well in the Bible, and then we see a great decline in their faith and their morals by the end of their life. Remember going through the story of Lot? As he moved closer and closer to Sodom and finally into the city of Sodom, remember us studying the end of his life as he had fled to the mountains and had drunken incest with his daughters and had children with them? And then there's the example of Samson, the macho man, the hero and the judge of Israel. He had done many great things thanks to the Lord who had given him a supernatural strength. Yet after a series of compromises, we saw the hero of Israel weakened, captured, and having his eyes gouged out. The Philistines were parading him around, making fun of him. Now, yes, he went out in a blaze of glory, you could say, but not the way that he could have. And I also think of Solomon, the wisest man of time, and also probably the wealthiest. And by the end of his life, he had multiplied wives, he had built altars for their pagan deities, and he also fell into the same problems. Now remember the faith that Isaac had when he was young. This was the strapping young man that allowed his ancient father to tie him up and put him on the sacrificial altar. More than likely, Isaac probably even climbed up there himself by faith. This was the man who was also found meditating in the field when the servant returned with the bride for him from his father's homeland. He obediently married her, and he took good care of her, except for that time in Gerar where he lied about being married to her. When they had trouble conceiving, Isaac did the right thing, and he prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife. When she had trouble during the pregnancy, she called upon the Lord as well. This couple was doing so well. Now here he is, putting himself and his stomach ahead of God's will. By this point, he has rejected his faith by deliberately and willingly preparing to do the exact opposite of what God said was going to happen. Now, he was probably mumbling to himself, does God really plan on using that mama's boy over there to lead our family into becoming a great nation? Look at my son Esau, my firstborn. He's brave. He's a mighty man. He knows his way around weapons, and he's growing stronger each year while Jacob's over there in an apron trying to perfect his souffle. After likely spending many years thinking that way, Isaac at some point decided to try to change the outcome of things and make it happen a different way rather than God's way. It's the classic case of not your will be done, Lord, but mine. Now that we have seen how far Isaac has fallen, let us now put the spotlight of Scripture on Rebekah and see how she's doing in chapter 27, verses 5 through 10. Rebekah was listening while Isaac spoke to his son Esau. So when Esau went to the field to hunt for game and bring home, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "Behold, I heard your father speak to your brother Esau, saying, 'Bring me some game and prepare a savory dish for me that I may eat and bless you in the presence of the Lord before my death. Now therefore, my son, listen to me as I command you. Go now to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats from there, that I may prepare them as a savory dish for your father, such as he loves. Then you shall bring it to your father that he may eat, so that he may bless you before his death.'" Things have definitely deteriorated in this household. It seems like nobody respects anyone. Nobody trusts anyone. And to begin with, the Bible clearly exposes the favoritism that they show to their children. In verse 1, it called Esau Isaac's son. In verse 5, Esau is again called his son. Then in verse 6, Jacob is called her son. And I don't think it was recorded this way accidentally. I don't think this was unintentional. That's simply the way that they treated them. Favoritism can be a dangerous thing. Showing preferential treatment to specific people, it'll destroy friendships. It'll make the workplace undesirable. It will ruin families, and it can destroy marriages. Our youngest daughter once asked my wife, in front of all the other children, "Which one of us is your favorite child?" My wife replied, "Who says I like any of you?" Of course, she was just kidding, but we are not about to get into a divisive topic like that, especially within the hearing of the children. Parents have to be very careful not to show favoritism between their children. All that does is drive a wedge between them and their siblings, and eventually between them and you. Another thing we find Rebekah doing was eavesdropping. Verse 5 said she was listening in on a conversation that she was not part of. Now we might be tempted to think, well, it's a good thing she did. But God had already told us and told them the outcome. Nothing that her scheming old husband in there is going to do is going to thwart God's plan. To complicate things even more, she started developing her own scheme to counter her husband's plans, and then she drags Jacob into the middle of this. What should have been done was to have her and Jacob walk in there and just confront Isaac while Esau was gone. They should have reminded him of the Lord's words when it was spoken to them and try to talk sense into Isaac. At the very least, she could have prayed about this whole situation first. I mean, God keeps his promises after all, without depending on us. But her instant response was to concoct a scheme of her own to counter her husband's scheme. We talked about her brother Laban and how he tried to scheme the servant of Abraham into staying longer so he could possibly keep the gifts and his sister Rebekah. I mentioned how Laban is going to try to scheme Jacob out of decades of work, which we will soon see. I think it's safe to say that Rebekah come by this honestly. She was a natural schemer, and her husband had nothing on her abilities to scam someone. I also must ask that she has to be a world-class chef as well. In verse 9, she commands Jacob to go out and get 2 goats for her to cook. Now remember, Isaac is expecting venison. He's expecting deer meat. His wife is going to try to clone that somehow with 2 goats. I have never had goat meat before, so I probably am an unfair judge of this. I have tried lamb, and it's pretty good stuff. I like beef, I like pork, I like chicken, but none of those things can compare to venison when it's cooked correctly. And if I'm ever in a position where I have to request a final meal, I'm going to side with Isaac on this one. I'm going to ask for venison. Now that I know that some of you people out there, you're probably good cooks, and you say, well, there's a way that you can make goat meat taste just like deer. Hush up, I ain't falling for that. People try to say that Mr. Pibb tastes just like Dr. Pepper, but it's obvious those people have never really enjoyed Dr. Pepper on the level that a lot of people do. Now, they will take all kinds of gross critters and weird bugs and animals and fry it and say, it tastes just like chicken. Well, then throw it away and give me the chicken instead. Plain and simple, problem solved. I believe many things that are in the Bible. I believe all things that are in the Bible. I believe in the resurrection. I believe in all of the miracles. I believe that God used a talking donkey to rebuke a wayward prophet. I believe in the talking serpent. But I cannot grasp the idea of someone cooking goat good enough to convince a man that it is deer meat. Rebecca might have been the best chef in the world, but that just exceeds human limitations. Let us go on and get verses 11 through 13. Jacob answered his mother Rebekah, Behold, Esau my brother is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man. Perhaps my father will feel me, then I will be as a deceiver in his sight, and I will bring upon myself a curse and not a blessing. But his mother said to him, Your curse be on me, my son. Only obey my voice and go, get them for me. Now we see the flaws in Jacob as he gets dragged into his mother's scheme to counter his father's scheme. On the surface, he appears to be in the right for questioning this plan, but really he's just scared of the consequences of failure. He thinks he's going to bring a curse upon himself instead of a blessing. So Jacob isn't asking, is this the right thing to do? He's asking, are we going to get away with it? He begins by bringing up the flaws that's in her plan. Her cooking might fool an old man, and he might be blind, but his sense of touch still works. And there is a difference between these 2 boys that's standing in the way. Remember that Esau was a hairy man, a very hairy man. He was a very hairy baby. That's how he got his name, which means hairy and red. Jacob was the opposite. He was very smooth-skinned. In other words, one of the twins hogged all the testosterone while they were still in the womb. Now, I will admit, I could be envious of some of these young kids today. A lot of them are just like Esau. They're growing a thick, full beard by the age of 15. And if they shave it off, it'll be right back within a month. It took me years to get what facial hair I have, and I still have spots where it doesn't grow in fully, and I'm 49 years old. I've seen women with better beards than me. It's just not fair. Okay, I'm teasing, kind of. But Jacob, he's a realist. His brother is hairy all over, not just his face, but his hands and his neck and everything. I once worked with a guy that had the hairiest back that I'd ever seen. He could survive a winter in Alaska shirtless if he had to. One guy that I worked with said if you were to put duct tape on his back and rip it off, that he would bleed to death. That is how hairy Esau was. But Esau was probably even worse. I mean, Jacob sees little chance of this happening, and you can easily see it failing and him getting cursed. Verse 13 contains a very tragic prophecy by Rebekah. It said that his mother said to him, Your curse be on me, my son. Little did she realize that when she had to send Jacob away so Esau wouldn't kill him, she would never get to see her favorite son again. Because of her scheme, her beloved son is going to be caught in the scheme of her brother that will last until well past her death. And as we go through this chapter and we see the sins and the lack of faith of this entire family, don't think for a minute that any of them are going to get away with anything. Every one of them will pay a price of some kind for their part part in this. Losing contact with her favorite son and living with the wrath of her husband and her oldest son is her part. Jacob's punishment will come up in a few more chapters, a few studies down the road. But for now, let us go ahead and go into verses 14 through 17. So he went and got them and brought them to his mother, and his mother made savory food such as his father loved. Then Rebekah took the best garments of Esau, her elder son, which were with her in the house, and put them on Jacob, her younger son. And she put the skins of the young goats on his hands and on the smooth part of his neck. She also gave the savory food and the bread which she had made to her son Jacob. It must have been a flurry of activity around her the moment that Esau left. Rebekah spent as little time as possible trying to convince Jacob to just go along with the plan. Finally, she pulled the famous mom card in verse 13, "Obey my voice, do what I tell you." And as we say today, "because I said so." Parents are sometimes quick to pull that card out when they don't have an answer for their behavior. Remember, those kids are watching you, and they're going to imitate your actions most of the time. She sent Jacob out to go get the goats and got the fire going and got started cooking at the same time. Meanwhile, the gears are turning in her head how to handle the other complications. The best way that she could think of is using more deception. Don't you know the devil was just really enjoying watching this scene play out? That old liar and deceiver likely added a few ideas to this, probably fueled the fire. So after preparing what had to be a miracle meal to imitate venison using goat meat, she ran out and got Esau's clothes and put it on him. Now Isaac's eyes may have failed, but his sense of smell was still sharp. Add to that, usually when a person loses one or more of their five senses, the other sense can become much sharper and keener as they depend on them more. This was in a time before Tide Pods and fabric softeners were invented. Esau's clothes smelled just like him, even when he hasn't worn them in quite some time. Plus, think how powerful this man's scent must have been. He is a man of action, and he spent a lot of his time out in the sun. He's usually sweaty, he's usually dirty, and all of that body hair has got to trap in sweat and bacteria. In addition to this, his clothes were outdoors most of the time, so instead of cooking smoke and oils from the house and perfumes like Jacob's clothes would smell of, Esau's clothes smelled of trees, grasses, weeds that he tramped through while he was out in the wild hunting. Verse 15 said she just happened to have a set of these clothes with her in the house. Maybe she was preparing to do the laundry, or do you think she might have been planning ahead that she might need them for such an occasion as this? Verse 16 showed us something besides her being a miracle chef. She's also an extremely fast seamstress. She made coverings for his hands and the smooth part of his neck. Now, these were the places that would not be covered by Esau's clothes, places where skin was exposed and could be touched by Isaac, and that would just give the whole thing away. So again, I have to wonder what Esau must have looked like for goat hair to feel the same as his. Goat hair is much coarser. It has an undergrowth, unlike human body hair. I picture Esau as a man who didn't wash himself very well if they could confuse him with a goat. I used to think that they simply tied a piece of hide or something to the back of his hands, but possibly Rebekah very quickly made a pair of gloves. They couldn't risk Isaac feeling string or twine or seams in the goat skin, so it must have been well done. And then there's this confusing part about the smooth part of Jacob's neck. As I said earlier, I've got spots in my beard that never grow in fully, but there are some people that can do that easily. And I also see people that don't trim their beards, and the front of their neck down their throat can be really hairy. It can be so bad you can't tell where the neck hair ends and the chest hair begins. The same with the back of the neck. Some people grow thick hair there, some don't. And the same can be said with the sides of the neck. Maybe this quickly thrown together garment was like a scarf that completely circled Jacob's neck so that no matter where his dad touched him, he would feel the thick matted hair and not the smooth skin of his younger son nor the seams or the strings that would hold this in place. But after all that work, they must have feared that time was running out, and they had to try what they had completed thus far. As far as they knew, Esau could be back at any moment. So in verse 17, she puts this stuff on Jacob, gives him the meat, gives him some bread and some wine, and sends him on his way. So let's see how this works out in verses 18 through 23. Then he came to his father and said, "My father?" And he said, "Here I am. Who are you, my son?" Jacob said to his father, "I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you have told me. Get up, please. Sit and eat of my game, that you may bless me." Isaac said to his son, "How is it that you have it so quickly, my son?" And he said, "Because the Lord your God caused it to happen to me." Then Isaac said to Jacob, "Please come close, that I may feel you, my son, whether you really are my son Esau or not." So Jacob came close to Isaac his father, and he felt him and said, "The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau." He did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands, so he blessed him. Now, I can't help but think of this scene right here, how hilarious it must have looked if you could have seen it. Could you imagine how goofy Jacob must look right now, considering the difference of their lives? I also picture Esau to be a much bigger and much more muscular man. So here is this mama's boy wearing his brother's clothes that are dirty and smelly and probably 3 sizes too big. He's got goat skin mittens on and something around his neck made out of goat hair. And we tend to think of him as entering his father's tent in this meek and this shy fashion, uncertain if their plan and their scheme is going to work. I picture him entering the room there in verse 18 and forgetting to disguise his voice, or doing a really poor job of it. I just imagine Jacob coming in and go, "Hello, father?" Hello, father? That might be the case because Isaac heard something that didn't sound right. He asked in verse 18 who he was. And in verses 21 and 22, Isaac made it clear that he doesn't sound like Esau. Now, before we go any further, I want to completely shatter any image that you might have had going on in your head as you try to picture this scene. Jacob is not a young teenage boy trying to prank his father. According to research done by Martin Luther, Isaac was 137 years old at this time, and we know from Scripture that he was 60 when these twin boys were born. That means these boys are 77 years old. How much more ridiculous must Jacob look, a 77-year-old man in his brother's clothes, covered in pieces of goat hide, pretending to be someone that he is not? Now we see the sins of Jacob. Besides going along with this plan, of course, he too could have done the right thing. He could have confronted his father. He could have set his mother straight and done this the right way, but he did not. And here he is lying to his father in verse 19. He blatantly said, "I'm Esau, your firstborn." And he got right to the point and basically told his dad, "Hurry up and eat so you can bless me." Because if Esau was to walk in on this, he might begin by laughing at how silly his brother looks, but then he would be seriously mad when he put 2 and 2 together and figured out what's going on. Never mind, he had already sold his birthright long ago. Verse 20, though, was the worst lie of them all. Isaac thought that his son didn't have to hunt very long for a deer, much less to process it and to cook it. Sometimes you get lucky and you get a deer on the opening day of hunting season, but more often than not, you're going to return home empty-handed many times before you ever harvest one. Isaac asked, "How did you get one so quickly, my son?" And I wonder if Jacob almost slipped when he answered this question. "Well, I didn't have to go far, Dad. The goats were cooped up in the pen behind. It didn't take long to track down a deer." The worst part of this all, Jacob dragged God's name into this deception. He used God to further his schemes, and that is not only dangerous, it is blasphemous. Jacob boldly declared, "Because the Lord your God caused it to happen to me." How terrible it's going to be on Judgment Day for all of those who flippantly use the name of God to enrich themselves and to make a name for themselves. How many people on TV are making millions selling false hope, selling these anointed snot rags and all of these claims of healing? They claim to do all of this in the name of Almighty God. And then when nothing happens, they claim, well, it's because you don't have enough faith. Taking God's name in vain means a lot more than just having it as part of your vulgar vocabulary. Using His name in any way that cheapens it, that makes light of it, or that disrespects God is blasphemy. Period. And this action right here might be the reason God allows Laban to take advantage of Jacob later on in the years to come as a form of punishment or a consequence of this sin. But apparently this was enough to cover the fact that his voice sounded differently than Esau. Maybe he told his dad, I went through some ragweed and the pollen is terrible and it's messed with my voice. But Isaac relied on his sense of touch, and the goat hair passed the test. Isaac said it's Jacob's voice, but it's Esau's hands. Perhaps Isaac just assumed he was beginning to lose his hearing as well as his eyesight. Verse 23 said he did not recognize him because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands, so he blessed them. Jacob was not out of the water yet, though. When we continue this chapter next time, we're going to see that Isaac was not fully convinced yet, and he asked a second time who he really was. And it wasn't until he smelled the clothes of Esau that Isaac finally settled down and believed it. It doesn't hurt the matters that the smell of that delicious food was also right there. Jacob was trying to get this stuff, the food in his mouth. Dad, hurry up and eat this, just to shut him up, to get him to stop asking questions. This whole scenario, though, it's tragic. Isaac has gone from being a man who walks by amazing faith to a man that lets his stomach overrule God's will. Rebekah has become the female version of her scheming brother. Jacob is more concerned with the chances of pulling this off instead of questioning the morality of it all. And Esau is happily out hunting, thinking that he has won, and it doesn't matter what God has told his mother about him or the fact that he had sold his birthright. Not once here have we seen anybody inquire of the Lord. It's bad enough that nobody trusts anybody in this family and that everybody is going to extremes to outwit the other by deception. God promised that Jacob would lead. Nothing is going to change that. And it's even worse when they're acting like this so-called blessing had magical powers or something. Isaac is just a man. He has no power to magically empower one son over another. His words are just words. Isaac cannot make anyone a more powerful nation than another one. It's just a political transfer of family authority. That's it. And God said that Jacob would inherit it anyway. The birthright wasn't stolen. The blessing wasn't stolen, regardless of mankind's attempts. In fact, it's almost anti-Semitic to label this chapter as a stolen blessing, like a lot of Bible studies do. The blessing was from God to Jacob. It was that way before they were born, and the right would always belong to Jacob. Nobody stole anything. Nobody sold anything. If you're honest, it always belonged to Jacob. Only God has the power to bless Jacob. All Isaac did was repeat the promises of God that were already given and say what the Lord revealed through him. That's it. But the worst part about this is that nobody went to the Lord in prayer first. The family has fallen apart. Everybody's at everybody's throats, and the devil's just sitting back watching all of this like it's another episode of Maury Povich or Jerry Springer. If only Isaac and Esau would submit to God's will, which will happen regardless of any stunt those two try to pull. And if only Rebekah and Jacob would get out of God's way and stop trying to help God out, like Abraham and Sarah thought they were doing when they brought Hagar into the mix. The biggest lesson of all of this is that God is God and we are not, period. Now, I don't know about you, but I find great comfort in that statement because things will go much better for us if we just follow His lead and do His will instead of trying to get ahead of him.